Welcome back to Middlebury College's career MIDDVantage exploration series, exploring careers in data analytics. My name is Ellie Thompson, and I am a senior class of 2022 at Middlebury College, and I would like to introduce you to this episode's speaker. I'm joined today by Nick Delehanty, class of 2017. He is the data director at the Federal Public Defender's Office in Brooklyn. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Nick.
Thanks for having me, Ellie.
Could you tell us a little bit about the work you do involving data analytics and at the Public Defender Office in Brooklyn?
Sure. So my job is data director for the Federal Defenders in Brooklyn. And so the Federal Defenders is the federal public defender for the Southern and Eastern Judicial Districts of New York. And what that means is basically it's New York City and a few surrounding counties. Upstate, I am based in the Brooklyn office and mainly handle stuff in Brooklyn, in Queens, Staten Island, Long Island, but the vast majority of our cases are Brooklyn and Queens. And what we do is we represent everyone, not everyone, almost everyone accused of a federal crime who can't afford to pay an attorney. We kind of run the full gamut of cases that you might expect in a big city like New York. We get a lot of like drug things, we get a lot of gun crime cases, we get a fair share of terrorism, child pornography, we get sort of a lot of stuff from the airports because we have both New York City airports in our district, and then also sort of just a lot of random stuff that finds its way filtered up to the federal system. So we'll get like big like RICO cases, we'll get murders occasionally, and every once in a while we deal with death penalty cases because the federal government still has the death penalty, even though New York State doesn't. And so that's sort of the context of the office. What I do as data director is a little similar to what the paralegal role is. And let me just mention, so the paralegal program at Federal Defenders is typically 2 years or so, and it's aimed at people who have recently graduated from college and want to get substantive exposure to like criminal law things, and also like nonprofit work, and really kind of confronting what like poverty looks like in sort of many different forms, and sort of what it looks like in terms of like the criminal legal system, what it looks like in terms of policies, what it looks like in terms of social work aspects. And paralegals are sort of problem solvers for almost all aspects of the case. You will be at the counsel table during trials, sort of like running the exhibits. You do a lot of factual investigation with investigators, do some sort of social work assignments with social workers. You have a ton of client time. You spend a lot of time at the federal jail in Brooklyn, meeting with clients and just checking in on them, seeing how things are going, assisting with like fact investigation things at the jail, just reviewing discovery with them. And this work is sort of split. Paralegals do a lot of it, investigators also do some of it, and social workers do some of it. And sort of common to all three areas, and also common to the lawyers who are representing clients in court, is that there's an unbelievable amount of information in almost every case. It is often overwhelming. We'll get evidence in discovery, and for a small case, it might be 1,000 pages of stuff. For a big case, it might be 10 million. And figuring out what's important and how to make sense of it and how to organize it best and how to sort of like mine that information for what is most useful for a case is a perennial struggle and something we encounter in almost every case. And so I sort of found out that that's something that I am good at and enjoy, and then realized that is, this whole new realm or discipline of like data science or whatever it's called, which is sort of like getting lots of information and figuring out what's important and what is less important, and then presenting the important stuff to people who need to see it to make decisions or to respond to crises or sort of do research or sort of plan to do things more efficiently in the future. And that's the very general description of what I'm doing. The more specifics, I think, there are three main areas as data director that are distinct from sort of the stuff I do as a paralegal, which are like operations. So an example of that is when COVID started, the federal jails closed in Brooklyn and Manhattan, and the Bureau of Prisons wasn't doing a great job at facilitating virtual visits or legal phone calls. And so, long story short, that became our responsibility. And it was a crushing amount of work. I think between the two facilities, there were like 2,000 people in jail, and figuring out a way to connect lawyers with their clients in a way that was equitable and efficient and made sense was a big problem we dealt with for a long time. And sort of was my introduction to like more abstract data things, where I had to learn how to code and sort of how to like develop an algorithm to do this most efficiently and present it to lawyers in a format that they would understand. And we took this task, which used to be a paralegal manning an email inbox for like 8 hours a day and sort of scheduling by hand. We reduced the amount of work it takes to like 30 minutes a day through like a quick Python application. And other things too, of sort of like phasing out carbon copy forms of the office. Of like, we could put this online. We could, have a record of this exist, not just in hard copies. That's sort of the real most like basic stuff in terms of data that gets done, but it is unfortunately very important and builds the foundation for far more interesting things. Like in terms of our casework, where we'll get like 10 million documents, and it's important to sort of be able to figure out what's there and what's not. And that is again a lot of analysis using like Python or like going through and sort of constructing complex searches to find things and put them together. And that's very much working hand in hand with like investigators and paralegals and lawyers as data director, and sort of consulting on like what the best approaches are to get the most useful information. And the last, which is sort of a whole new domain, is this like strategic research area where there turns out there's a lot of information about the criminal legal system out there, and a lot of it is poorly structured or sort of in a format that we can't use, or getting it is a real pain. And so what I'm doing is laying the foundations to sort of have a comprehensive idea of like, how many cases are there in our district in a given year, without having to wait until like the federal judiciary releases its like year-end report a year and a half from now. And then from like looking at those cases, looking at like sentencing outcomes and sort of figuring out like what an average sentence is for a certain kind of case, and making that information accessible for lawyers for use in sentencing memos and other kinds of things during the process. And that is a lot of work. It's also sort of totally learned by doing at this point for me, which is sort of all of it, but it is like taking the case information from like a federal case database and, structuring it in a way that we can make comparisons between two cases, where otherwise it would just sort of be solely qualitative stuff and would take a very long time to compare two things. So there's a lot of that. It's a lot of like case data, a lot of sentencing data. There's also like sort of random stuff of like New York City is really great data about all the city agencies, including the NYPD and other like law enforcement and court agencies. And so it's like just being aware of what's out there and knowing what might be helpful in a submission.
I'd be curious to know how, as you moved from being a paralegal to your current role right now, how that has changed the group of people that you're working with and who you're interacting with on a daily basis.
The office is really sort of very collaborative at all levels of like lawyers, like managing attorneys, paralegal, social workers, investigators, and like the IT staff. And the idea is like on any case, the people who are on the case are sort of whoever needs to be on it to get the best outcome for the client. So that might be, just a lawyer if it's not really a very paper heavy or fact intensive case. And otherwise it might be, 3 lawyers, an investigator, 2 social workers, a paralegal, and like multiple like IT people if it's something really complex, like a death penalty case. And so as a paralegal, I was working with basically everyone in the office already. And in this role, which is really kind of a new role for federal defenders, and that is like data director, but I think I'm still like technically classified as a paralegal in the whole federal system. And it is working with the same groups of people, but sort of with a specific focus most of the time on like big, like larger data projects as opposed to sort of like day-to-day casework. So for example, like what I'm doing now for one thing is looking at sensing data for specific kinds of gun charges and seeing who gets sentenced to what, and sort of examining that data more closely than we might if it were sort of like asking a paralegal or asking an investigator to like do research, right? Even asking an attorney to do like non-legal research into this to just like pull, what's the most recent info we have on this. Instead, I'm developing more of a foundation so that we'll have answers to questions, and it's not always going to be like we got to run right at the last minute to figure out what we need to like fill in this citation or like to cite to like have this fact in some submission.
I think that's like really interesting to see like how your work with like data analytics and the quantitative data transcends into the qualitative, like larger narrative of what is going on in the office and the clientele that you have. It's very interesting. And thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'm really curious about your own experience from like campus to your careers. You mentioned that when you were a part of the paralegal program, like the earlier years of being a part of being a paralegal, that it's for people who are recent graduates. So how did MID prepare you? I know that you were a history major when you were here at Middlebury, so definitely tell us the rest of your story.
So I graduated in 2017. And as we all remember, sort of November 2016, there was an election or something along those lines. And I actually had a job lined up at a federal agency in DC. And after Trump was elected, he retroactively froze all hiring and all like job offers. So I was this is like April of my senior year. So I was like, oh, gotta find something to do now. And then wound up spending a couple of months or probably like 8 months as a paralegal at a small like white collar criminal defense firm in Manhattan, and really seeing the fancy side of this business. And so I had seen the federal defender's job opening for the paralegal program at that time and applied and got it. At Middlebury, what prepared me for this job? I think probably the most important thing I learned at Middlebury was also the most cliched liberal arts thing you can say, which is learning how to learn. I also think, even though it's not like I'm not like churning out like novels every day, but knowing how to write, super important. Just even like coming across, I guess in like my stuff, I'm constantly like explaining things or like trying to say why something is in the data the way it is, and knowing how to like get that across clearly is a huge asset, instead of having to like constantly clarify. I think probably writing a thesis was the most important, and having a huge like independent project that you have to manage your own time and sort of you're accountable to, I mean, ultimately to your advisors and people grading it, but it's really to yourself, and that is important. The Shepherd program or internship through the Privilege and Poverty Academic Cluster administered by the Center for Community Engagement, that was definitely great real world preparation. I worked at the public defender in Washington, DC, and just sort of seeing how like an office like this would operate, and sort of knowing like what a case looks like and sort of how the steps are, and sort of like working on a case, what they are, is all very helpful. And I think it was a huge leg up in any kind of like interview situation for this kind of work.
I really appreciate hearing a little bit about your experience at Middlebury, and also hearing that it seems like how you put it, a roundabout but very direct way to your career path. I think that's really like compelling and encouraging to hear as the almost graduate at Middlebury, to like there isn't like a typical career path for a data scientist. You can take a lot of different paths, and there's a lot of different interests that you can pursue before you end up and land your data science career. So that's very encouraging to me. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. Given your experiences and what you know now, is there any specific advice that you could give to a current student about like how best to prepare themselves for entry points into this career field?
Yeah, if I were trying to give advice to myself like 5 years ago to get here, I probably would have said it's important to like know the basics about statistics. You know, you don't have to like go crazy with it, but it would be good to like, you know, be clear on like what mean and median are and how they're different. There isn't really, I mean, you know, I'm an example of it. There is no academic background specific to this skill set. I think it is more about knowing how to learn and how to adapt to new challenges that show up. Technical skill sets are important, but I think that they're nowhere near as important as like the non-technical ones in terms of like being able to like talk to people and relate to them, especially in like public defense, because it's not like I'm shut up in like an ivory tower somewhere only like crunching numbers. I have a lot of direct client time, interacting with lots of people all day long, and sort of need to be able to shift into that mode of like meeting people where they are and sort of relating to them on those levels, and then also being able to do like the data stuff as well. And then in terms of the technical stuff, I, you know, am probably not a great example, or probably not giving great advice. I think it's important to like know the basics about computing. For most jobs, I think Excel, if you have like above average knowledge of Excel, you'll probably stand out at like any internship or like entry level job that exists. That was definitely my experience. And then shifting into sort of like programming stuff, I think like basic Python knowledge is helpful. Like basic scripting, like Bash, is also useful, but not like critical.
I think one thing that I found is our Center for Careers and Internships is really good at knowing the opportunities that are open and what's next. So that's a really great place for people to always touch base and check in there. But thank you again, Nick, for your engagement and helping us students prepare for our first career destinations. I know I'm definitely going to take the advice and the insight you've shared as I pursue potentially a similar career as you yourself. So thank you so much. All right, this concludes this episode within the series Exploring Careers in Data Analytics. In closing, I want to encourage viewers to tune in to get career perspectives and advice from a number of professionals in a broad variety of organizations in other episodes of this series as well. I also want to encourage you to tune in to other MIDDVantage series, which can be accessed through the Events and Programs tab on the CCI website. Thank you again for watching.